The biting tang of wood polish filled Eliza's nostrils as the Duchess Seraphina's silken gaze impaled her across the glittering ballroom, silencing the room's cheerful chatter. Every face swiveled, a thousand eyes demanding spectacle as the Duchess's cruel smile cut through the air, her hand dramatically tearing the delicate lace of her gown. "No," Eliza pleaded silently. "Please, not this." Humiliation thickened the air, yet in her stillness was a flicker of defiance, a quiet strength no one expected. Before we fully unravel this tale of an unseen artisan, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love knowing where you're joining me from. The chandeliers burned like small suns above the polished floor, each crystal trembling when the main doors admitted another draft of winter air. Heat shimmered off countless candles and bodies. Perfume mingled with beeswax and the faint, sweet scent of lilies. Eliza moved along the walls, a silent current in the grand room. She knew their invisible borders, the line between conversation and silence, between the idle wave of a ringed hand and the rebuke behind a raised fan. Her plain shoes, with their thin soles, let her feel the grain of the floor beneath its burnished polish. The house had been burnished all afternoon for this display. Her hands smelled faintly of lemon and soap, her sleeves clean, but mended twice, a testament to her quiet life. The livery fit well because she had made it fit, not because anyone measured her. She passed a cluster of gentlemen with powdered throats and careful smiles, their laughter pitched to carry. One called for more wine without looking. She anticipated the reach of his hand and left the glass where he would find it, an inch from tipping. He would never know how close he had come to a stain on his embroidered waistcoat. That was the work, to keep disaster invisible. Tonight, the family gave their largest ball of the season. Guests arrived earlier than usual, the ladies intent on being seen, the gentlemen intent on not appearing eager. Flowers clung to every banister, lilies whitening in the heat, roses leaning toward their reflections in the mirrored panels along the walls. Candlelight softened faces and sharpened jewels. The chatter sloped around the room in tides, a ceaseless, glittering hum. She could feel its vibrations in her very skin. When the footmen by the main doors straightened themselves, Eliza knew without looking. A ripple passed through the room. Fans made a soft, synchronized rustle. The talk turned bright for a moment and then subsided under a different kind of attention. She turned because everyone turned. Lord Julian Ashworth entered with the kind of grace that came from never needing to hurry. He had a way of filling a doorway without pausing in it. His coat was cut to an inch of austerity, his cravat pinned with a small pearl, not the gaudy kind of gem that begged for notice. He carried notice with him, whether he chose to or not. The host bowed, the ladies dipped. The gentleman nodded too often. The prince's expression suggested that all this pleased him in the way a familiar painting pleases, a thing to be glanced at and moved past. Eliza watched as others watched, careful to keep her face angled slightly down. He had a smile made for rooms like this, generous enough to flatter, remote enough to remain untouched. When he laughed, people straightened as if they had guessed the right answer. He accepted the right hands. He made the right remarks. He drifted through compliment and greeting like a ship through a well-mapped harbor. Her tray grew heavy. She shifted it and slipped sideways to avoid the hem of a gown that was all froth and patience. On the far side of the room, a candle guttered, and a footman reached up with a taper to steady it, but his sleeve passed too close, and the flame leaned away, relit itself, and stood again. Even the candle knew how to behave under watch. Eliza wondered briefly what it was to be looked at as a fact and not as a function. The mood had been bright and content. Now it sharpened, seeking an edge. The room had been fed with wine and music. It was hungry for something to talk about tomorrow. Eliza reached the wall again and set her tray on a side table to trade it for another, stacked with sweet pastries. Sugar clung under her nails. The pastry felt weightless on the tongue when she had tasted the scraps in the kitchen earlier, and then the baker had sent her away with a flick of his towel, as if her hunger meant she would run the kitchen empty. She had not looked back. She never gave anyone that satisfaction. The small gnawing ache in her stomach was a familiar companion, a constant reminder of the fine line between quiet survival and utter ruin. Across the floor, a lady's laugh rose too high, then broke into a cough that she disguised with her fan. Someone murmured in sympathy. The hostess adjusted her glove with care that suggested her hand might be shaking. None of this belonged to Eliza, and yet the room passed through her senses the way light passed through glass, seen and not seen. She caught herself staring, and the habit of her life returned. Eyes down, chin level, shoulders set. A footman brushed past, and she felt the brief press of his sleeve against her own. His face said nothing. His nod was almost invisible. They were practiced at not existing. In the gallery, the first violin looked toward the floor. A nod traveled like a signal through the players. The bow rose. The first notes of the next waltz would follow the prince's desire, or some other important guest. Eliza waited for the sound, but Julian delayed it. He took a step and then another away from the circle of those ready to claim his attention. He moved as if he were bored, which meant that boredom would be indulged. He tilted his head, spoke a word to a gentleman who bent too close to hear a better joke than was offered, and smiled as if he had been entertained. He was not. The smile did not reach his eyes. He thought of other rooms like this one, other nights when the same polished floor reflected the same hungry faces. The genre of admiration rarely changed. He marveled sometimes that he could be so exhaustingly necessary to the happiness of people he did not know. He marked the host's efforts, the floral profusion, the air folded over with warmth, the band hired at some expense because they could play more modern pieces without falling into a country muddle. He knew quality without needing to comment on it. He had learned early that pointing at a thing diminished it. The waltz was new enough to be interesting. It made people uneasy in a way that thrilled them. The hand placed at a waist, the turns that asked for trust. He could make that unease into fun with very little effort. It was the sort of thing expected of him. To disappoint expectation was work. He was not inclined to work tonight. He let his gaze pass the room and return with intention. The ladies were splendid, each a composition of silk, posture, and practiced glance. Some had the modesty of perfect self-possession. Some had the hunger of those who wanted a triumph and would seize one if it came close enough. He did not stop there. Along the edge of the floor, where the mirror swallowed the bodies and returned them as a wider room, he saw a servant standing with a tray of pastries. She did not fidget. Her position was precisely chosen between a chair that might lurch backward and a gentleman's careless broad stance. Her hair had escaped a little, a strand drawn loose by heat and motion. It clung to her temple in a fine, damp curve. She steadied her tray with her left hand and placed a pastry on a plate with her right. Her fingers were quick and neat. He would have looked away. He would have called someone's name and offered the kind of gallant remark that ended an evening with nothing to remember. He considered the choice the way a man considers a card game he expects to win. One of the gentlemen near him muttered something about how the evening needed liveliness. Another laughed in obedient agreement. A lady nearby said she feared fainting from pleasure and needed the refreshment of surprise. He smiled as if they had been witty. They had not, but their idea had married his boredom. He felt the small relief that comes when a tedious play offers a moment of unscripted nonsense. If he gave them something to laugh at, they would love him for it tomorrow as they loved him today. The expectation would be met, and he could sleep. He looked back to the servant. The mirror caught him looking and multiplied the act. It gave him back a figure unbothered, a prince indulging his taste for amusement. The thought formed itself almost without his participation. The Duchess Seraphina, Julian's aunt, however, had also taken notice. Her sharp eyes, usually reserved for judging gowns and alliances, had found Eliza. A slow, saccharine smile stretched across the Duchess's face, a predator's prelude. With a deliberate, dramatic gesture, she lifted a hand to her silken gown, her fingers ripping a delicate lace flounce with a sound that seemed to echo in the sudden hush. "My dear girl," she called out, her voice carrying across the stunned room with chilling clarity. "You with the nimble fingers. Come, mend it here and now, a demonstration of true skill, for all to admire." Eliza felt the pressure of warm water everywhere and nowhere, the collective gaze of the ballroom pressing in. She stood at the room's perimeter, caught by every glance as if by a hook. The tray in her hand seemed suddenly absurd in the center of so much attention. She placed it on the nearest table with care that veiled a tremor. A puff of sugar rose and fell. The scent of cinnamon added itself to the heat. Her hands folded one over the other because they needed something to do. Her throat felt tight for a breath and then opened again because breath had to come. The sound in the room had changed. Laughter had been held back by curiosity. The week's gossip had appeared and asked to be served. The Duchess smiled, a thin, knowing curve of her lips that promised exquisite amusement. She savored the moment, allowing the silence to stretch, to bind Eliza in its cruel embrace. The room leaned forward by a fraction, hungry not just for a story, but for the satisfaction of seeing a servant stumble. It was a tableau of expectation, a silent demand for Eliza's public undoing. Eliza heard the Duchess's words once, and then they echoed as if the walls had spoken them back. Mend it here and now. Her lips parted, but no sound came. The way the command landed on her made her feel counted and discounted at once. She kept her shoulders steady. She thought for a breath that she would simply be handed the lace and thread at the side, out of the direct light. But the Duchess's extended hand, holding the torn fabric aloft, left no doubt. It was a public performance, a soft cage of humor curving into a shape around her. If she refused, the cage would close and stay shut, marking her as insolent. If she agreed and failed, it might swing wide, then snap shut again with mockery. She did not know which was worse. The laughter pressed. Humor made a soft cage. She could feel its wires curve into a shape around her. If she refused, the cage would close and stay shut. If she agreed, it might swing wide and then snap shut again. She did not know. A voice near the back of the room said it was clever. Another voice agreed. Someone said it was harmless. Someone said it was daring. Words like harmless and daring had never been applied to her life. Her life was careful. Her life avoided edges. The thought lit in her like a match. It did not blaze. It burned with a small, unarguable flame. She did not want to be the object of laughter. She lifted her chin. She did not look up far. The movement was small, and it changed everything inside her. She took a step closer. It made a sound like nothing, a sound only she could hear. "Does she even know how to mend such lace?" someone said softly, thrilled with the idea of cruelty as a new flavor of sweetness. Another murmured, "Surely she can't be expected to perform such delicate work under these conditions," a feigned sympathy that still anticipated her failure. Eliza heard none of it now. Sound blurred at the edges and sharpened at the center. She saw the floor, the pattern of the wood, the clearance between chairs, the space she would need to kneel without grazing a skirt or a knee. She brought herself forward, her shoes silent on the polished floor. Julian, having observed the Duchess's cruel jest, had allowed his initial boredom to transform into a keen, analytical interest. He watched Eliza approach, noting her composure, the calm in her eyes that startled him. It was not defiance, not exactly, but a deep well of stillness that promised something far more interesting than a flustered servant. He felt the small relief that comes when a tedious play offers a moment of unscripted nonsense, though this was of a different, more compelling order. If he gave them something to talk about, something genuinely unexpected, they would love him for it tomorrow as they loved him today. The expectation would be met, and perhaps, more importantly, a quiet injustice could be averted. He lifted his chin slightly, stepping forward, his presence instantly commanding attention. The Duchess, still savoring her triumph, looked up, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face at the interruption. Julian's voice, clear and effortlessly caring, cut through the expectant hush. "What an exquisite evening, Aunt Seraphina," he said, his smile generous, yet unreadable. He then turned to Eliza, his gaze acknowledging her with an unexpected intensity. "But such artistry," he added, gesturing toward the torn lace, "deserves a grander stage, does it not? I have a piece, ancient and fragile, at Ashworth Hall, a tapestry in dire need of a master's touch. Perhaps this skilled hand," he inclined his head towards Eliza, "is precisely what I've sought." The room jolted as if struck, and the sound of obedience. Silence came, stunned and soft, and then cracked open into confused murmurs. The Duchess's smile froze, her eyes narrowing as she processed Julian's unexpected intervention. Eliza's eyes widened for a fraction of a second, then steadied. She understood. He was not rescuing her in the conventional sense, but offering a redirection, a reframing. The humiliation remained, but now a flicker of possibility ignited beneath it. Julian, her nephew, had subtly challenged her cruel amusement, and to openly contradict him now would be to risk her own standing in the room. His gaze met Eliza's for a fleeting moment, a silent question and a quiet invitation passing between them. Julian did not look away. He allowed the smile to return, fuller this time, acknowledging his own role in their happiness. Yet it was aimed at Eliza now. He turned, and as he did, the musicians paused, bows lifted but unmoving, waiting upon a new cue. Indeed, Julian continued, his voice resonating with an authority that left no room for argument. Ashworth Hall requires a master embroiderer to restore its priceless collection. Miss Thorne, he said, extending a hand, not to lead her in a dance, but in an offer of professional collaboration, would you consider lending your esteemed talents to this worthy endeavor? I believe your precision and artistic eye are precisely what is needed to honor such a legacy. Eliza took one breath, deep enough to taste the roses and the varnish. Her hands, which had trembled with fear, now steadied with an unexpected resolve. She did not look at the Duchess, whose face was a mask of strained politeness. She looked at Julian, her gaze level, meeting his with an unwavering clarity. Yes, your lordship, she said, her voice clear and without a hint of subservience. I would be honored to restore your family's legacy. The simple affirmation carried the weight of a choice, a quiet defiance that surprised the room more than any outburst. Air rushed through the room as if a window had been opened. It carried relief and outrage and something like awe. The band did not wait for instruction this time. The leader brought his bow down with a clean, decisive stroke that sent the first chord through the spine of the house. The measure gathered under their feet. The Duchess, her face still rigid, managed a brittle laugh and turned away, adjusting her glove with meticulous, shaking care. Guests murmured, some still confused, others sensing a shift in the evening's script, a new narrative unfolding before their very eyes. Julian, ever the master of the subtle maneuver, inclined his head to Eliza, a brief, private acknowledgement of their unspoken accord. With a graceful turn that drew attention away from the still frazzled Duchess, he subtly guided Eliza towards a less conspicuous side table, away from the direct, lingering gazes. The delicate threads of those tapestries are truly a marvel, he murmured, just loud enough for her to hear, his words a shield of purpose, a lifetime of stories woven into each stitch. I believe you will find the work most rewarding. Julian, with a practiced ease, produced a small, portable embroidery frame from a discreet pocket, along with a selection of fine silk threads. He placed it gently on the side table before Eliza. A small start for the evening, he said, his voice low. Eliza, without faltering, picked up a needle. Her fingers, quick and neat, selected a thread of muted crimson. The needle flashed under the candlelight, catching the delicate silk, then diving into the fabric of the small practice piece. Her focus was absolute, her concentration a tangible force. Curious onlookers, drawn by the unusual spectacle, leaned in, their initial amusement giving way to a grudging fascination as they watched the intricate patterns begin to emerge from her hands. The whisper of thread against fabric became the only sound that mattered to her. Julian watched, his earlier detached amusement dissolving into something far more profound. He observed the serene focus etched on Eliza's face, the unyielding steadiness of her hands, the precision of each stitch. This was not merely skill, it was a devotion, an intrinsic grace that transcended her station. He realized it was not bravado, but an ethic, a deep-seated commitment to excellence that resonated with a part of himself he rarely acknowledged. The contrast between her quiet mastery and the superficial chatter of the ballroom became stark, deepening his respect and stirring an unexpected fascination. Micro hooks flickered through the crowd. A lady's fan stilled and then snapped open. A gentleman forgot to sip his wine. A gloved hand lowered inch by inch, its owner unaware that it drifted into her lap. Even the host shifted and then stilled, a reed finding the middle of the stream. Some faces were skeptically amused, ready to spring on the first error. Some had softened into attention that acknowledged skill, even if it resented the source. A pair of younger men near the door wore the look of conspirators who had been given more than they expected and did not yet know how to spend it. The room, still unsure how to frame this unexpected turn of events, began to divide itself, subtly, between those who saw a charming diversion and those who sensed a deeper, more unsettling truth. From a shadowed corner near a pillar, Sir Alaric Thorne observed, his agreeable smile never quite touching his eyes. A man of subtle influence and keen calculation, Alaric belonged to the loose circle around Julian that tightened when opportunity appeared. He had an ear for what pleased power, a nose for where trouble might be turned into leverage. He had watched the Duchess's initial jest with an appreciative scholar's attention, and Julian's intervention with a butcher's cold assessment. Now his gaze moved between Julian and the maid Eliza. There was a story here, a potential weakness, a thread he might pluck and unravel to his own advantage. Alaric detached himself from his cluster, moving with a practiced grace that allowed him to slip through rooms unnoticed until he chose otherwise. He approached Julian, a casual, friendly smile on his lips. "Ashworth, my dear fellow," he murmured, his voice low and conspiratorial. "Ever the impresario. A novel diversion, to be sure." His gaze flicked towards Eliza. "One only hopes such unconventional entertainment does not lead to unforeseen consequences. Society, as you know, has a rather insatiable appetite for new stories, and some, once whispered, are difficult to contain." The implication hung in the air, a veiled warning against elevating a servant. Julian's smile did not waver, though a subtle tension stiffened his shoulders. "Indeed, Alaric," he replied, his tone light, "and society's appetite is precisely what I endeavor to satisfy. As for stories," he glanced pointedly at a group of gossiping ladies, "they will always find their tellers. One merely hopes to provide them with a more elegant narrative." He dismissed Alaric with a slight nod, but the seed of unease had been planted. Julian knew Alaric's reputation for collecting and leveraging inconvenient truths. Eliza, meanwhile, continued her work, her needle flashing. She sensed the shift in the air, the subtle stir of new whispers, but her craft was her anchor, her focus an unseen shield. She would not allow the contagion of talk to penetrate her calm. Later, as the supper trays began to circulate, Julian drifted toward Eliza's side table. He held a small, perfectly wrapped bread roll from his own plate, its warmth radiating through the napkin. He placed it gently on her tray, avoiding eye contact with the few curious glances nearby. "For sustenance, Miss Thorne," he murmured, his voice low enough to be private, "one cannot create such beauty on an empty stomach." Eliza's fingers, poised over her embroidery, paused. She looked at the small roll, then briefly at Julian. His gaze was kind, without the detached amusement she had come to expect from his rank. She tucked it under the cloth, a small, quiet act of acceptance. The warmth of the bread was a comfort, a fragile connection in the indifferent grandeur. For the first time, in a long time, she felt truly seen, not as a function, but as a person deserving of simple kindness. As Eliza later made her way down a quieter corridor, carrying an empty tray, Sir Alaric Thorne emerged from the shadows. His smile was agreeable, his posture relaxed, but his eyes held a calculating chill. "Miss Thorne," he said, his voice a smooth purr. "A moment, if you please. One worries for a talent such as yours, suddenly brought into such prominent light." He shifted slightly, blocking her path, his courtesy a sheath for his true intent. "Attention that does not belong to you," he continued, his voice lowering, "can be a rather perilous burden, particularly when there are little facts from one's past that society might find less charming than your needlework." Eliza's hands, holding the empty tray, tightened imperceptibly. The draft from the garden door lifted a loose curl against her cheek and set it down again, as if to say, "Remember, you are here now." Alaric's words, like stones, landed directly on the trap door that had always guarded her belly, her family's past. Her father, a respected merchant, brought low by false accusations, forcing them into obscurity, their name tarnished. It was the wound she had spent years covering, the shame she carried in silence. She had learned early that fear was useful only to the extent that it told you where not to step. The rest was noise. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her afraid. Julian, having excused himself for a breath of fresh air, had chosen a side passage that led to the long windows facing the gardens. He had heard from the far end the light tap of a shoe and the faint ring of porcelain against silver. Then Alaric's smooth voice, low and insidious, followed by Eliza's sharp, almost imperceptible intake of breath. Julian did not hear the full conversation, but the fragments were enough. Attention that does not belong to you. Little facts from one's past. Unfortunate if they found their way into rooms that do not forgive. He recognized the predatory cadence, the veiled threat. A coldness settled in his gut. Alaric was weaponizing Eliza's past, whatever it might be. Julian returned to the ballroom, his movements unhurried, but his mind sharp. He saw Eliza by a sideboard, her hand trembling slightly as she set down an empty glass. He saw the gentleman half turn, the lady's fan angle like a small blade, the way conversation bent to allow cruelty to pass without touching it. He did not like the shape of himself that had set this in motion. He crossed the floor with a pace that read his ease, arriving at the sideboard as Eliza set down her tray to steady her hand. He reached past her and took the nearest glass, cool water, not wine, and set it deliberately on the tray she had just stabilized. "Take this to the lady by the pillar," he said, voice low enough to be heard by her and by those nearest without giving the room a gift. "She looks faint." The lady by the pillar did not look faint. She held herself like a person who enjoyed watching men dispatch others for her comfort. The instruction was nonetheless unassailable. It made the maid's next steps clear. It turned her from target into function on the prince's word without making her his shield. She lifted the tray again, her fingers steady now, not because he had told them to be, but because the task was clean. "Yes, Your Highness," she said, eyes level with the line of his cravat, not his face. Julian gave the faintest nod and turned, intercepting the gentleman who had bristled, and now found himself obliged to lower his bristle before it became laughter. "Tell me the thing you were so eager to share," he said amiably, while ensuring the man's body shifted to give the maid room to pass. The gentleman's words dried to a trickle and then revived sluggishly on another topic entirely. Later, as the hosts approached, praising his charm in managing the evening's liveliness, Julian smiled politely. Inside, he knew it had required more than charm. It had required seeing and a refusal to let a thing stand simply because it pleased others. He would not say that aloud, but the truth resonated within him. He caught a glint of satisfaction in the eye of the one who had made the cutting comment earlier, the lady who had enjoyed Eliza's initial humiliation. He met her eyes once across a gap and let his gaze pass through her. It was not a rebuke. It was absence. She did not like it. She laughed a little too loudly at something someone said, her fan moving more quickly than necessary. Julian's indifference was a more potent weapon than any direct confrontation. There would be time for rebuke later, or there would not. The calculation bored him. He had other numbers in his head now, the ones that counted breath and steps, and the distance between outrage and awe. The band changed tempo again. The leader in the gallery glanced down. The house's rhythm had returned, if not its innocence. A footman approached Eliza with a tray of fresh glasses for the supper that would be carried in on soft feet. She took the tray and adjusted her hold, careful of the slope of the hallway where spills were born. Her mind moved in two compartments now, the one that tracked work and the one that held the words, "When I speak, the past comes with me," like a weight wrapped in cloth. She passed a doorway and felt cold air brush the space between her shoulder blades where the fabric sat too thin after a long evening. She did not shiver. She could not afford such weather on her skin. At the end of the room near the long windows, Eliza bent to set a glass and rose to find herself within arm's reach of a small cluster of men whose conversation paused to take stock of her proximity. "Precisely my point," one of them murmured, not bothering to lower his voice. "It makes sport of the thing." His companion smirked at his boots. Julian stepped in before a second companion could add the comment that hung between his teeth. "You will forgive me," he said to the small cluster with the kind of mock apology that smooths over recklessness when wielded by a lesser man. You mistake sport for art. It happens to the best of us." One of the men stiffened, offended, and unsure how to lodge the complaint without stepping into a sharper point. The prince tilted his head and smiled as if they had made the clever remark. The men allowed themselves to be disarmed. The maid set the glass with perfect placement and withdrew. He could not do this for every small sting. He could not be everywhere. He told himself as much and felt the statement failed to absolve him. He made the rounds, offered a word to the leader in the gallery that made the man's shoulders settle, stood for the required number of compliments and petitions without dropping any of them on the floor. He caught a glimpse of Eliza returning the empty tray to the side table, her hands no longer shaking. They had not forgotten the threat. They had decided to work anyway. The calculation bored him. He had other numbers in his head now, the ones that counted breath and steps and the distance between outrage and awe. His sense of responsibility, once a mere flicker, had solidified into a heavy, insistent weight. She was bending to resettle a stack of plates when Julian's shadow moved into the corner of her eye. "Walk with me," he said quietly. Not as a command, not as an invitation a gentleman extends to a lady, but as a practical phrase that could belong to any two people who had work to do. His timing was exact. He spoke at the moment a footman arrived to take the tray from her hands. The footman accepted it without comment and turned away. Eliza hesitated just long enough to measure cost and cover. The band began a new strain that asked for the room's attention, and the room obliged. They stepped into the narrow passage behind the pillar, where the sound softened, and the faces around them turned toward the center. "I heard," he said before she could decide how to stand. "Not all of it." "What did you hear?" she asked, her voice low and steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "That someone believes a story about you would travel well." She kept her breath steady. "People prefer a story they can dress themselves," she admitted. It did not sound like invention. It did not begin as one. She allowed the admission and nothing else. Her eyes stayed on the space just beside his shoulder, avoiding his direct gaze, yet conveying an unspoken depth of meaning. The truth of her hidden past, hinted at by Alaric, now hovered between them, stark and vulnerable. "I cannot afford to have it told for me," she said, her voice barely a whisper, yet filled with an unwavering resolve. He heard the quiet desperation, the precariousness of her position. "If I speak," he began, instinctively reaching for his usual methods of deflection and control. "You will make it bright," she interrupted softly, her gaze still fixed on his shoulder. "They will see it better." Her words were not a rebuke, but a statement of simple, immutable fact. His intervention, however well-intentioned, might only amplify the very thing she sought to conceal. He absorbed it. He felt the difference between their lives press its seal on the conversation. It cooled his skin. He had been born into a world where his word lit lamps and dimmed them, where his pronouncements shaped reality. He had never had to consider that his word could also be a torch that caught things he had not meant to set on fire, especially when those things were someone else's fragile life. The weight of his privilege, once a comfortable cloak, now felt like a heavy, ill-fitting burden. The corridor, smelling of night and duty, emphasized the chasm between their experiences. "Will you be dismissed?" he asked, the question escaping before he could fully calculate if he had the right to ask. He heard what she did not say. That dismissal would be a wound. That her work was not only work, but shelter from hunger and the stories people told when they had time to invent cruelty. He had never been hungry in that way. He had been hungry for honesty and for air, and that hunger felt foolish to confess in a corridor that smelled of night and duty. Her simple answer, "I do not know," spoke volumes of the uncertainty that was her constant companion. "I will speak," he said, the instinct of a man used to speaking and hearing the world shift. It came out too quickly. She made a small motion with her hand, a tilt of palm that both thanked and refused. It may do worse than silence. He absorbed it. He thought of the rooms where his word lit lamps and dimmed them. He thought of the rooms where his word was a torch that caught things he had not meant to set on fire. He closed his mouth on the next promise. "I have offended you," he said instead, the words quiet, a genuine admission. "You have made me visible," she said. "That is not always a gift." "I know." The music rippled in the bones of the house. A figure in livery passed the far end of the corridor and glanced once swiftly and went on. The glance was enough to send information into the house with the swiftness of a rumor. He felt time shorten around them. He wanted more of it and could not take it. "Then what can I do that is not harm?" he asked. Small for a man like him, and true. "Do not laugh," she said. "Not at me." He let the glove go still. "I have already laughed." "Then stop." A breath left him that might have been a promise if he had been the sort of man who believed in simple redemption. He was not. He was better at debts than faith. A footman approached, steps careful, gaze low. He stopped at the distance from which a summons could be given without offense. "Your Highness, you are wanted." The title entered the corridor like cold water, restoring all the boarders. Julian did not ask by whom. He looked at Eliza and then away, because looking again would say too much in a house that listened. "I am wanted," he said to the footman and to himself. "So I am." He slipped the glove onto one hand with the care of a man who needs a task. He did not say goodbye. The word felt too thin to span the length between what had happened and what must happen now. He inclined his head and moved away. The draft followed him until the door swallowed it. Eliza remained by the small table with the empty tray. She did not reach for the ewer. Her hands had steadied. The room felt both narrower and cleaner. She was not relieved. She was not undone. She was suspended. Silence returned in a new shape. It had an edge to it, a bright edge, like a knife that had just been drawn across cloth to test it. She knew the feeling. She had felt it when bread was scarce, and a landlady's patience was thinner than the walls. Something would break this silence. It would be better if she chose. She lifted the tray. The metal was cool where it had not been warmed by her hands. She turned to go, but a figure detached itself from the far end of the corridor. It was Alaric Thorne, his agreeable smile in place, his presence as unwelcome as a chill draft. "You must be thirsty," he said, as if observing the weather. "I have work," she said, ready to go around him. He shifted so that going around would be rudeness. He did not touch her. He would never stoop to that. He let the shadow of the pillar arrange itself near his shoulder, making him taller without making him blunt. He lowered his voice, and the courtesy became a sheath. "A word," he said. "Only a word for your sake." She set the tray down again because the sound of it trembling would gratify him. She did not give him that. The tray made no sound. Her face arranged itself into the attentive neutrality that lets superiors believe they are being heard. "The evening has been lively," he went on, a preface to cruelty couched as conversation. Liveliness demands a price. Those who do not understand the arithmetic are often surprised to find themselves in arrears. "I have no arithmetic," she said, which was true and not, and he heard only the part that served him. "Then allow me to calculate. You have attracted attention that does not belong to you. You have been allowed to keep your place because our hosts are generous and because the person at the center of the room found your performance charming." The word lodged like a stone under her foot. She did not show that she had felt it. "Charming things," he said, smiling, "are often set down when something newer arrives. One must be careful not to mistake a hand's use of an object for affection for what it holds." He leaned the slightest bit, enough to bring his voice nearer her ear. "It would be unfortunate if the little facts you have hidden found their way into rooms that do not forgive." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Your father's unfortunate business dealings, for example. A most unsavory tale for a family crest. Wouldn't you agree?" Her throat tightened. Her hands were empty. She had the urge to pick up the tray simply to keep them from being part of the scene. She did not move. He watched her stillness as if it were music and he had composed it. "You will go back to your work," he said. "You will stay to the walls. You will decline any further summons, and you will thank fortune that this night, which could have made you visible in a way you cannot survive, will be permitted to fade." His voice was so courteous she could have mistaken it for kindness. "And if I do not, then I speak," he said, his smile cooling. "And when I speak, the past comes with me." He bowed with an elegance that made mockery look like charity and stepped aside to let her pass, an act that felt less like deference than like the movement of a gate after it has closed. She did not move. "You understand," he said gently. She understood, and the word felt like a lock sliding into place. She stood with the draft lifting the loose hair at her temple and the weight of unshed breath in her chest, and felt the old dangerous knowledge return. That silence can be taken for consent when you cannot afford to contradict it. Her hands had nothing in them. That felt dangerous. She reached for the tray because the weight steadied her, metal against palm, cool and familiar. She took one step and then another until her feet remembered the old economy of service. The door to the ballroom stood open by a fraction. Music ran out from it and spread thin along the floor. Laughter hung in the air, less sharp than before, but eager to regain shape. She fixed her eyes on the line where wood met stone and walked toward it, counting the beats of the waltz, because counting kept thought from breaking apart. She had learned early that fear was useful only to the extent that it told you where not to step. The rest was noise. The man had said past. The word had opened a trap door in her belly and left it open. But her present demanded attention. Candles, faces, trays, steps that must carry her without catching a heel or brushing a gown. She lifted her chin the smallest degree required to see without seeming to see, and entered the heat again. He had not gone far. He had left enough distance to be seen by those who needed to see him depart, and had curved back along a second passage where the lamps were fewer. Habit led him there. Unease held him. He did not like the idea that a thing could be begun by him and finished by the room without his consent. He stepped into the darker angle by a pillar and waited for breath to decide his next motion. Motion arrived from another direction. He had heard Alaric's low, insidious voice and Eliza's quiet, fearful words. "What passed?" Followed by Alaric's chilling reply. "The one you hoped this house would cover. The one that will fit a tale men want to tell too well to be denied." The air moved over his skin as if a door had been opened inside him to a place not often visited. He felt the cold shock of understanding. He had made a jest, and in doing so, had unwittingly opened the door for a predator like Alaric to expose and destroy Eliza. His casual amusement had threatened her very existence. The picture was both worse and less exact than the truth, but clear enough. He stayed where the pillar cut the lamplight across his coat and waited until the vibration of the voices ceased. When Eliza stepped back into the ballroom, he let his breath go slowly so that his face would be ready to be seen again. He could not walk in from the dark like a man who had been skulking. He adjusted his glove and moved unhurried back through the door with a courtesy that would read as attentiveness rather than retreat. His internal compass, which had once spun aimlessly, now pointed directly at the very center he had filled so easily with jest and avoided with truth. He had tipped something, and it would not be righted by silence or small uses. He lifted a hand to the gallery. The leader lowered his bow head in answer and let the phrase he had been about to command die in the air. The players stilled, the notes left hanging like bright silk that has been cut and must be caught. Conversations wilted at the edges. Fans stopped, chairs stilled. The house listened because this was its habit when the prince made it. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "Forgive me," he said to the room in the noise it preferred. The apology slid through ornament and found wood. It settled. "I made a promise in jest." A laugh attempted to rise from somewhere near the pillar and failed, caught in a throat that found itself suddenly disloyal to its owner. He let it die. It will not remain one. He looked toward the band again and then away because the next note belonged to him. He then turned back to the room, his gaze sweeping over the astonished faces. "What followed was true," he declared, his voice clear and unwavering. "You have seen it. So have I." No one laughed. A chair creaked and then hushed itself. The band stood with bows lowered. He looked to the hosts, not as if asking permission, but as if including them. "I hope you will forgive the theft of your evening center," he said, his tone carrying a new gravity. "I will not return it in the condition I found it." The hostess's mouth, which had held itself along duty's line all night, softened. The host inclined his head. "Your Highness," he said, using the smallest number of words possible, "we are witnesses." It was the right answer. It neither claimed nor denied. It put the responsibility where it belonged, on the man who had made a jest and now made it a promise. He looked back at Eliza's hand, still on the sideboard. The ring finger bore no mark. He had not thought beyond this moment, and for once, that did not feel like improvidence. He crossed the floor. The path he walked was the same one he had walked 100 times for compliments and petitions. It felt new. His steps were quiet. He could have chosen any bright face turned up like a flower. He did not. She was setting the last glass on the far board when he stopped in front of her. The nearest conversations broke apart as if someone had put a hand into a flock of doves and opened it again. Silence collected around them, with the speed of a rumor made flesh. The band held its breath. The candles did not gutter. They watched. He did not pretend not to see the tray, the plain sleeve, the clean edge of the cuff that had been turned twice to hide a worn seam. He did not stand too close. He stood at the distance where the first words of a waltz could be spoken without turning them into command. "If you will accept the position of master embroiderer for Ashworth Hall," he said plainly, voice carrying because he gave it weight and not because he made it loud, "and help me restore a legacy, I will commit to you as my partner in this endeavor." The words did not fall like a stone this time. They landed like a seal pressed in warm wax. The hall felt the impression and waited to see if it would hold. She did not reach for his hand. She did not drop the tray. She let the sentence enter her and sit. This was the moment where humiliation had been born earlier in the night. This was the moment where it would either be cleansed by truth or soured by repetition. The room had waited all evening for something to fix its story around. It had found it. She allowed herself one breath, deep enough to taste the roses and the varnish, and the small cold trickle that found its way along the floor from the prop door. "You are certain," she said, only for him, because certainty offered in public is sometimes only bravery in private. "Yes," he said. The word did not swagger. It stood. "And you understand," she said, "what you are asking of me." "I do," he answered. And because he was what he was, he understood only part of it. He let the rest show on his face. He let her see that he knew he did not know. Not fully, not yet. She looked past his shoulder once briefly at the crowd that had made her into a story against her will, and then back at him, at the person who had begun that story and was now putting his name into it as more than author. "Then you will ask me," she said quietly, asserting her agency, demanding the respect of a formal invitation. He did not flinch. He bowed as a man bows to a woman he intends to honor, not as a prince takes possession of property to the approval of a room. "Will you join me in this endeavor, Eliza Thorne?" he asked. She set the tray on the sideboard. Her hands were steady. She let them be seen. She uncurled her fingers from the empty work and placed them where the dance demanded. "Yes," she said. Air rushed through the room as if a window had been opened. It carried relief and outrage and something like awe. The band did not wait for instruction this time. The leader brought his bow down with a clean, decisive stroke that sent the first chord through the spine of the house. The measure gathered under their feet. It was the same waltz and not the same at all. He extended his hand. She gave him hers. The heat of that contact ran a line from palm to shoulder and molten stillness to breath. His other hand found the formal place at her waist. It did not press. It promised. Her free hand settled at his shoulder with the assurance of someone who had chosen the act. They stepped. Not into a waltz, but a measured, purposeful stride across the floor, a symbolic first step into their new partnership. The room leaned in. The first turn took them out of the shadow of the sideboard and into full light. They met the light with open faces. He led, and he did not strain to do it. He made space. She entered it and made it wider without breaking it. The circle grew and tightened by turns, the floor sliding under them with the willing gleam of a stage that knows it is bearing something it will remember. A murmur began along the wall, the kind that gathers when people recognize that they must change their minds or be ridiculous. Some did not change them. Their mouths hardened to keep shape. Others let surprise soften. The difference marked itself without words. "Do not look at them," he said, the words breath against measure. "I am not," she answered. He believed her. He did not think about his own face now. He thought about not failing her, which was the clearest thought he'd had all night. Their steps continued, a quiet rhythm against the lingering whispers. His hand at her waist was a point of heat around which her world arranged itself, a subtle anchor in the turbulent sea of public opinion. He led with the easy assurance of a man who expects to be followed. She allowed him leadership, and quietly chose the line of it. Her step did not challenge. It clarified. The turn took them past the mirror. Their reflection arrived with them, unadorned by flattery. He saw a man without his coat of jokes and a woman who had refused humiliation and become more visible by refusing him earlier and accepting him now. He kept his gaze trained on the space where the next step must fall. She matched him with a steadiness that gave the room nothing to catch but grace. The image in the glass was not a joke. It was an answer, a new truth reflected back to a room that had thrived on artifice. The leader in the gallery felt the lift in his bones and gave the violin a sweetness he would remember later as a private pride. The drum spoke in the soft, taut syllables that keep breath from going astray. The flutist dared an ornament and was rewarded with a turn beneath it, so clean that the notes seemed made for their feet. The rails of the gallery hummed against the floor post with each measure. She rode the hum, feeling the music as a partner in their quiet declaration. They passed the pillar where a woman had sharpened her voice earlier and found the voice bladeless now. The woman's fan moved more quickly than necessary. Her cheeks had pink beyond fashion. Her circle still laughed, but it was a different laughter, forced to mimic a pleasure it did not feel in order to avoid feeling what it would not name. Julian inclined his head almost imperceptibly, a silent acknowledgement of the shift in power, a quiet triumph that did not need to be trumpeted. "Do you regret this?" he said, low, at the turn that required no decision. "No," she said. And then, after a breath, because truth benefited from exactness. "Not for myself." "For whom then?" "For you." He felt the honesty land in him and steady his step rather than shake it. The vulnerability in her voice, so rarely offered, struck him with a profound clarity. It was a gift of concern he had not earned, and it humbled him. "I have done worse for less," he said, and it was as close as he could come to saying that the cost, whatever it was, had already been paid when he let another person carry his joke. They turned along the long axis of the room. The hand at her waist warmed through cloth to skin. Her breath caught and fell back into time. There was no coyness in the contact, only the rightness of it. Their partnership insisted on trust. She gave it not as tribute, but as collaboration. He received it with the humility of a man who had learned the price of presuming. Someone at the far end began to clap, tentative, as if applauding would absolve them of everything that had preceded it. The sound was not yet a tide. It threatened to be ridiculous. The host lifted his chin a fraction, and the band, understanding, lengthened the phrase and drew attention back to music rather than noise. The claps died of embarrassment. Good. The declaration should be carried by melody, not by a scramble to be on the correct side of history. She let herself feel the floor under her as a partner. The floor had saved her earlier when people had sharpened their pleasure against her. It saved her now by holding them both evenly and making the movements inevitable rather than ornate. She could sense each plank's give, the varnish's slickness, the slight tilt near the north edge that had to be adjusted for with an extra fraction of weight. Knowledge like that was love of a kind. It anchored her when the air went too bright, reminding her of the enduring truths beneath the fleeting illusions. "Look at me," he said, not as demand, but as shelter. She did. The house narrowed to a column of space between them that moved with them. In that column, there was no laughter. There was only the breath they shared and the way the next step always arrived just in time and never earlier. The world blurred at the edges, the faces of the crowd receding into a soft, indistinct canvas. In that intimate column, a quiet understanding bloomed, shielded from the judgment of the room. They came into the final passage. The melody lifted its head. The leader allowed it a small golden length, the way you let a child run ahead to the gate, knowing you will catch her before she falls. He poised them with a pressure that asked, not told. She answered with a turn that would let them finish in the very place on the floor where she had begun the first public dance that had threatened to make an end of her. He recognized the choice and followed it. That small act of following became a statement. The room understood. Agreement moved through the crowd in a shiver. The cruelest faces arranged themselves into something more complicated. They could not change their nature in an hour. They could for a moment be made to reconsider what it cost to feed it. The last notes came down like the cleanest snow, quiet, discreet, without the vaunt of a storm, and rested on the surfaces of things without soaking in. At the final count, he did not let go of her hand. He turned her into stillness and bowed, not deep as supplication and not shallow as mockery. Exactly right. When he rose, he addressed the room without releasing her. "I spoke foolishly earlier," he said, voice traveling to the corners without bruising the air. "I will not defend it. I will only say that what followed was true. You have seen it. So have I." No one laughed. A chair creaked and then hushed itself. The band stood with bows lowered. He looked to the hosts, not as if asking permission, but as if including them. "I hope you will forgive the theft of your evening's center. I will not return it in the condition I found it." The hostess's mouth, which had held itself along duty's line all night, softened. The host inclined his head. "Your Highness," he said, using the smallest number of words possible, "we are witnesses." It was the right answer. It neither claimed nor denied. It put the responsibility where it belonged, on the man who had made a jest and now made it a promise. He looked back at her hand in his. The ring finger bore no mark. He had not thought beyond this moment, and for once that did not feel like improvidence. He lifted her hand until the back of her knuckles caught the light. He did not kiss it. He pressed his lips to the air above it, old courtesy held in modern hands, and then lowered it into his where it stayed. "Will you believe me?" he said, low for her, while holding the room with the mere fact of his posture. "Not my words only, but this." "I will believe what you do," she answered. "I am doing it," he said. "Simple as a man casts off a weight and breathes more easily for it." She drew a breath that ran through her like warmth. It was not victory so much as relief tasting of roses and wax and the salt of a long night shouldered well. Applause began, uncertain again, then stronger when it found it could be sincere rather than fashionable. It did not break like thunder. It rose like rain that has chosen a field and will make something grow there, whether the field deserves it or not. The faces altered, people stood. A woman who had been cruel drew her shoulders in and became smaller in her chair. Men who had made remarks forgot them. The band raised their bows and held them in salute as much as readiness. He turned to the leader and nodded once. The leader understood. He lifted his bow, and instead of plunging into something quick to erase the charged air, he chose a simple waltz. Not the new one, not the daring one, but a melody so clean it had no edges. It made children's feet remember their mothers' kitchens. It made old men straighten their backs without thinking. It made this moment belong as much to the servants as to the silk. It was a melody that spoke of truth and enduring grace, a quiet anthem for a new beginning. "Again," he said to her, not with triumph, but with gratitude. "Again," she said. They took the first steps of a second waltz, quieter, closer, less for the room and more for themselves within it. He kept her hand and would not let the space fill with words. She gave him the turn and the look and the breath that said, "The wall has been climbed without you owning the climb." It was a shared moment, a private language understood only between them, woven into the fabric of the dance. He met it with the steadiness that said, "I have learned to stand on the right side of my own folly." Around them, the servants moved with the unremarked grace of people who have always known how to make space for joy without stepping on it. Someone righted a chair. Someone closed a window by an inch to steal a draft that had chilled a lady's nape. The night brought its own transitions forward as if to say, "I will carry this moment safely into morning without bruising it." Their dance was a quiet affirmation, a visible declaration of their new understanding. When the tune ended, they did not wait for applause. He lifted her hand, turned her out and in, and let the last step place them where the evening had begun to change her life. He held her there and faced the room with her, as if to say, "This is ours, and you may look." She looked once up into his face, not to ask and not to doubt, but to learn it as it was, when stripped of audience. What she saw steadied the small tremor she had kept at her wrist since the first jest. He bent his head close enough for breath and not for spectacle. "We will not feed them," he murmured. "No," she said, and then added with the courage of someone who has learned that truth does not always draw blood, "and we will not starve." They stood for a heartbeat more. and then stepped apart on purpose, not because the room demanded it, but because they had chosen their own path, their own rhythm. He turned to the nearest gentleman, who had looked most ready to sneer, and gave him a task. Arrange the thanks to the band, in a tone that sounded like honor and felt like discipline. The man bowed, flattered to be useful, confused to be forgiven. He moved at once, eager to comply. Julian's subtle manipulation of the social currents was now wielded not for amusement, but for purpose, for the quiet protection of the woman beside him. She crossed to the sideboard as if reclaiming it, lifted a glass of water, and met the hostess's eye. The older woman tipped her head the smallest degree in a gesture that neither apologized nor congratulated, and somehow did both. The maid drank, and the water tasted like the first sensible thing of the night. The leader lowered his bow and rubbed the heel of his hand along his wrist in a motion he would feel in the morning and be proud of. He looked down at the pair and saw not the scandal he had expected to report to his wife, but a steadiness he would try to translate into music the next time a hall demanded it. He returned to her not to claim, but to stand. People approached in little knots, bringing politeness that could be mistaken for blessing. He let them. He let their words soften the edges of the story they would carry away from this room. He did not try to fix their minds. He did not need to. The visible thing had been done. The rest would follow, or it would not. He had chosen his side. "Will you rest?" he asked her when a pocket of quiet opened. "I will work," she said, and smiled, small and entire. "And then I will rest." He inclined his head, accepting her order of operations. Eliza, a glass of water in hand, found a quiet corner by the sideboard. The hostess, passing by, offered a subtle, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture that acknowledged the shift in the room, and perhaps a quiet respect. The water, cool and clear, tasted like the first sensible thing of the night, a cleansing antidote to the evening's sharp edges. In the gallery, the bandleader lowered his bow. He rubbed the heel of his hand along his wrist, a motion he would feel in the morning and be proud of. He looked down at the pair, Julian and Eliza, and saw not the scandal he had expected to report to his wife, but a profound steadiness, a quiet harmony. It was a rhythm he would try to translate into music the next time a hall demanded it, a melody of dignity and unexpected grace. People approached Julian in little knots, bringing politeness that could be mistaken for blessing. He let them. He let their words soften the edges of the story they would carry away from this room, reshaping it into something more palatable, more agreeable. He did not try to fix their minds. He did not need to. The visible thing had been done. The rest would follow, or it would not. He had chosen his side, and that was enough. "Will you rest?" he asked her when a pocket of quiet opened. "I will work," she said and smiled, small and entire. "And then I will rest." He inclined his head, accepting her order of operations. Her work was her anchor, her purpose, a quiet declaration of self. He understood that. He understood the profound dignity in her choice, the inherent strength in her quiet resilience. "Then I will wait for what?" he asked, a gentle question in his voice. "For the next waltz," he said, as if the whole of his life could be organized around the truth that had turned a house full of hunger into witnesses, and for whatever must be done between now and then. She let that be answer enough. She took up a tray, not because anyone had asked, but because it pleased her to choose something in a room that had tried to choose her. He watched her go and did not follow. He did not need to. The distance now meant something other than hierarchy. It meant trust. A new kind of understanding had been forged between them, a silent pact of respect and shared purpose. The subtle shift in his own heart was undeniable. A recognition of a partner, an equal, in a world that rarely acknowledged such a thing. The night moved on. Candles shortened. Wax gathered like white pools on gilt saucers. The doors near the garden felt the cool edge of midnight and did not let it in. People stood, stretched, made the small noises that mean departure has begun to think itself possible. The grand ball, a stage for so much drama and revelation, began its slow, graceful retreat into memory. The host found relief and pride sharing the same breath, their earlier trepidation replaced by a muted satisfaction. The footmen looked at one another in the way of men who have spent a battle together and intend never to mention it. a shared understanding solidifying in their quiet glances. The house, after its moment of disarray, settled back into its accustomed rhythms, forever altered, yet striving for its usual composure. Julian remained until remaining would turn into vanity, and then withdrew without taking light with him. As he passed the pillar, he looked toward the corridor where the draft lived and saw only the shadow of a tray on stone, the shape of work that made dignity possible. He smiled at it as if at an old ally, acknowledging the quiet strength it represented. It was a profound insight into Eliza's character, a testament to her enduring spirit. She felt him pass. The current in the room altered, and her skin, attentively tuned, read the change. She did not turn. She finished the thing in her hand and the next, and then she allowed herself to lean once, briefly against cool wood, not for support, but for the simple pleasure of knowing it would be there when she needed it. The sense of peace was a new companion, one she had earned. When at last the band lifted their bows for the final bow, and the house returned the gesture with a murmur that would be repeated in telling, she looked to the center of the floor where the circle had begun and ended, and placed her palm, light against her own heartbeat, as if to mark it in that spot for the morning. It was a silent vow, a personal affirmation of her newfound strength and the indelible mark of the night. The morning after the ball broke soft and golden over Ashworth Hall, painting Julian's private study in hues of amber and dust. He surveyed the room, the remnants of last night's spectacle lingering in his mind like a half-remembered dream. The weight of his new commitment settled over him, not as a burden, but as a compass pointing to a genuine path. He found himself eager, a feeling alien to his usual jaded existence. The promise he had made, the partnership he had forged, felt like the most real thing in a world of artifice. Miles away in her humble lodgings, Eliza was woken by a sharp rap at her door. A liveried messenger stood stiffly on her threshold, a thick, wax-sealed letter in his hand. "For Miss Eliza Thorne, Master Embroiderer," he announced, his voice precise. Eliza's heart gave a surprised lurch. The formality of the address, the prestigious title, felt like a dream. She broke the seal, the crisp paper rustling in her trembling hands, the words inviting her to Ashworth Hall, to begin her new life, a tangible sign that the night's events were indeed real. Eliza packed her few belongings, her embroidery tools carefully wrapped in a worn linen cloth. The small, familiar objects felt heavy with the weight of her past, yet lighter with the promise of her future. She considered the meaning of Master Embroiderer not merely a job, but a recognition of her art, her skill, her very worth. It was a title that defied her past, a quiet rebellion against the shame her family had endured. A mix of apprehension and fierce hope pulsed through her. She was leaving behind the invisible currents of service for a visible purpose. Ashworth Hall loomed grandly as Eliza's rented carriage approached, a canvas of history whispered in stone and ivy. Its elegance was a muted echo of its past, grand but slightly faded, awaiting the touch of renewal. She was greeted respectfully by Julian's staff, a marked difference from the dismissive glances she was accustomed to. She moved through the sweeping entrance hall, her humble attire a stark contrast to the quiet opulence, yet her head was held high. A sense of awe mingled with a tremor of trepidation. This magnificent place was now to be her home, her workplace, her new beginning. Eliza was led to a spacious, light-filled room on the quietest side of the hall. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating a large, sturdy embroidery frame, an array of quality silks, and carefully arranged tools. It was clearly a space prepared with thought and respect, a testament to Julian's promise. A profound sense of gratitude washed over her, mingled with an eager anticipation. This was not merely a workspace, it was a sanctuary, a place of creation where her art would be honored. Her fingers itched to begin. Julian entered the workshop shortly after, his demeanor formal yet infused with a warmth that eased Eliza's apprehension. He was no longer the jester of the ballroom, but a man of earnest purpose. "Welcome, Miss Thorne," he said, his voice steady. "I trust the arrangements are to your liking." He spoke of the tapestries, their history, and his trust in her skill, without pretense, treating her as an esteemed colleague. Their conversation was direct, professional, Yet beneath the surface, a dawning intimacy began to shimmer, a shared understanding unspoken. Julian led her to the first damaged tapestry, a magnificent piece depicting the Ashworth family crest, its threads frayed and colors muted by centuries. Eliza, with a keen, discerning eye, immediately identified the intricate stitches, tracing the historical context of its design. She spoke of the particular dyes, the regional variations in technique, her insights impressing Julian deeply. He listened intently, recognizing not just her technical mastery, but her profound connection to the art, to the stories woven into the fabric. Their shared purpose created a comfortable rhythm, a harmonious blend of expertise and appreciation. As Eliza examined a particularly intricate tear in the tapestry, Julian spoke softly, almost to himself. This section, I believe, dates from a period of considerable challenge for my ancestors. A past oversight by one of them, a weight the family has carried. He did not elaborate, but Eliza recognized the veiled confession, the shared burden of family legacy, of errors that demanded redemption. A quiet empathy passed between them, a subtle acknowledgement of their mirrored experiences with the past, seeking to mend what was broken. Their conversation drifted from the technicalities of embroidery to the broader philosophies of life. Eliza spoke of how precision keeps a floor from becoming a hazard, and a life the same. Julian found himself listening intently, absorbing her quiet wisdom. He recognized the profound ethic he had observed at the ball, a principled approach to existence that resonated deeply within him. Her words, though simple, held a truth he had long sought in the superficiality of his world, a connection that transcended their stations. Later that day, in the quiet solitude of his study, Julian paced. Alaric's insidious words, the threat to Eliza's past, now haunted him with a new, sharper clarity. He saw the danger not as a game, but as a very real, very personal attack on someone he had come to respect, to protect. His earlier amusement had given way to genuine care, a fierce determination to shield Eliza from the cruelties of society. He began to form a plan, not merely to deflect, but to actively dismantle Alaric's influence. Eliza worked late into the evening, the rhythmic click of her needle a soothing balm. The intricate patterns grew under her hands, each stitch a small act of reclamation. She was aware of Alaric's lingering threat, a dark shadow at the edges of her new piece. But here in her workshop, surrounded by threads and the stories of centuries, she felt empowered. She was choosing her path, choosing her purpose, choosing something in a room that had tried to choose her. The quiet strength of that choice was her shield. Days later, in the hushed opulence of a London gentleman's club, Sir Alaric Thorne was at work. Leaning in conspiratorially, he subtly dropped hints about Eliza's family scandal to a receptive gentleman, framing it as a cautionary tale of misplaced trust and hidden disgrace. His words, a delicate poison, spread quickly. He watched the contagion of gossip take hold, a satisfied smirk playing on his lips. His web was being spun, designed to unravel Eliza's newfound standing before it could solidify. Back at Ashworth Hall, Julian received a coded message from his network of informants, detailing Alaric's machinations. A cold fury settled in him. He spread maps and documents across his study desk, his mind a whirlwind of strategy. He would not defend Eliza directly, for that would only confirm the rumors. Instead, he would expose Alaric's own questionable dealings, his past financial irregularities, the very hypocrisy he sought to project onto others. He would use society's own love of scandal against its architect. Julian orchestrated a series of coincidental meetings at various social gatherings. At one such event, he subtly guided a conversation to the topic of integrity in business, then innocently mentioned a complex, dubious venture Alaric had been involved in years prior. The seeds of doubt, once planted, germinated swiftly. Alaric's agreeable smile faltered, his posture stiffening as veiled questions began to circulate. The man who wielded whispers now found himself under the scrutiny of his own tactics. Society, ever fickle, began to turn its gaze. Weeks later, Alaric found his whispers about Eliza's past falling on deaf ears. His carefully crafted tales were met with polite dismissal, or worse, knowing glances that implied his own declining reputation. The contagion of talk he so expertly wielded was now unfed when it came to Eliza, its power diminished by the growing cloud over his own name. Society, having found a new, more satisfying target, turned its back on Alaric, leaving him to retreat from its circles, his malice blunted, his influence broken. In her workshop at Ashworth Hall, Eliza worked on a particularly challenging section of tapestry, meticulously restoring a segment of the Ashworth crest with fine gold thread. Her skill was absolute, her hands steady, each delicate stitch a testament to her mastery. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the gleaming threads, the intricate patterns growing under her focused gaze. A profound inner peace settled over her, a confidence born of purpose and recognized worth. The quiet hum of the hall around her was now a comforting companion, not a source of hidden threats. Julian often sought her out, not with demands, but with a quiet presence. He would lean against the doorframe, watching Eliza work, the soft light of the workshop creating an intimate tableau. No words were needed. They shared a shared quiet, a comfortable silence filled with mutual respect, and an unspoken affection that deepened with each passing day. The rhythmic click of her needle, the scent of linen and silk, the tranquil presence of Julian. It was a harmony she had never dared to dream of. One afternoon, Julian entered with a small, beautifully bound sketchbook and a collection of rare, vibrantly dyed threads. "For future designs, Eliza," he said, his voice soft, "and for the stories yet to be woven." He spoke of a future woven, not just for his tapestries, but for their lives, for the legacy they were building together. Eliza's hands, accepting the gifts, trembled slightly. Her eyes, shining with unshed emotion, met his, recognizing the profound depth of his gesture, a promise more sacred than any spoken vow. Eliza looked at the gifts, at the rich, vibrant threads, at the blank pages of the sketchbook waiting to be filled. Julian had seen her in a way no one else ever had, recognizing her art, her purpose, her deepest desires. His understanding went more than he knew, touching the secret corners of human longing within her heart. It was a love that honored her craft, respected her spirit, and cherished her truth. A quiet, profound happiness bloomed within her. Julian reached out, his hand hovering, then gently touching a loose thread on Eliza's work, a near touch to her hand. Their eyes met, and in that shared gaze, an unspoken vow passed between them. It was a promise of shared lives, intertwined destinies, a love that had blossomed from unexpected seeds of kindness and respect. The air in the workshop seemed to shimmer, charged with the silent weight of their profound connection, a moment of climactic intimacy. He quietly left, leaving Eliza with her thoughts and the enduring warmth of his presence. Eliza returned to her work, her heart full, her hands steady. She knew her past was not erased, but it no longer defined her. It had simply become a part of the rich tapestry of her life. Her future was hers to weave, with Julian by her side, a future filled with purpose, art, and a love that truly saw her. The subtle hum of the house, once a reminder of her hidden status, now sang of belonging. Seasons turned at Ashworth Hall, each bringing its own gentle transformation. Flowering gardens gave way to autumn leaves, then snow-dusted roofs, and finally the vibrant green of spring. Inside, the great hall slowly regained its former glory. Eliza's meticulous work breathed new life into the ancient tapestries, their colors deepening, their narratives speaking with renewed clarity. The hall, once a place of faded grandeur, now gleamed with a quiet vitality, a testament to the artistry that had found its home within its walls. Close-up shots captured Eliza's hands, deftly weaving new threads into old fabric, her needle flashing with rhythmic precision. The once faded narratives on the tapestries now shimmered with rejuvenated colors, each scene brought back to life under her masterful touch. A particularly large tapestry, depicting a medieval hunt, now vibrated with a vibrancy it hadn't known in centuries, proudly displayed in the great hall. Eliza's focused expression reflected her profound satisfaction, the quiet pride in bringing beauty back from the brink of oblivion. Julian often visited the workshop, not to command, but to observe, a silent sentinel of admiration. His gaze, once detached, was now filled with quiet pride, a deep respect for Eliza's talent, and the unyielding spirit that fueled it. Their shared comfortable silence spoke volumes, a language woven from threads of mutual purpose and unspoken affection. He would simply watch her work, the soft light catching the gold in her hair, finding a peace he had never known before. One afternoon, as Eliza meticulously worked on a delicate floral motif, Julian approached. He placed his hand lightly on the edge of her embroidery loom, a gesture of shared ownership and unwavering support. Eliza looked up, her soft smile meeting his warm gaze. Their eyes met in an unspoken confirmation of their bond, a silent promise woven into the fabric of their shared lives. His touch was a grounding presence, solidifying the unspoken future that stretched before them. In London, the Duchess Seraphina, now acutely aware of Julian's unwavering protection of Eliza and the irreversible downfall of Sir Alaric, found her influence severely diminished. Her attempts to spread gossip were met with cold politeness, her once sharp cruelty now blunted by society's shifting tides. She rarely left her grand estate, a lonely figure in her vast, silent drawing room. Her earlier amusement turned to bitter resentment. The power she once wielded had crumbled, replaced by a quiet, self-imposed isolation. Months passed, and the fame of Ashworth Hall's restored tapestries spread. A prominent noble, renowned for his discerning eye, visited specifically to consult Eliza. She, composed and confident, discussed her work with the noble as an equal, her expertise undeniable. Julian observed from a respectful distance, a knowing smile playing on his lips, his heart swelling with pride. It was a public validation of Eliza's artistry, a testament to the new legacy they were building together. One soft evening, Julian and Eliza walked in the private gardens of Ashworth Hall, the scent of blooming roses heavy in the air. They discussed the day's events, the noble's visit, the flourishing of their shared endeavor. The cost was high, perhaps, Julian admitted, his gaze reflective. Eliza turned to him, her hand brushing his. "But the weaving," she replied, her voice soft but firm. "The weaving was worth it." It was an affirmation of their journey, a recognition that every challenge had ultimately strengthened their bond. Julian stopped their walk, turning to Eliza. In the soft evening light, he gently took her hand in his. It was a natural, unforced gesture, a silent declaration of profound, unspoken love. No grand words were needed, only the warmth of his hand, the depth of his gaze. The touch was an anchor, a promise of enduring partnership, of a shared life woven together with threads of respect, affection, and mutual purpose. Eliza felt Julian's hand, her quiet heart finding its anchor in his steady presence. Her past, once a source of fear and shame, was now a testament to her strength, a foundation upon which her future, rich with love and purpose, was being built. She was no longer just Eliza Thorne, the disgraced merchant's daughter, but Eliza Thorne, master embroiderer, beloved partner, truly seen and deeply cherished. A profound sense of peace and belonging settled within her. Years later, Ashworth Hall stood fully restored, gleaming with life and art. Its tapestries, vibrant and magnificent, told stories of history, family, and the enduring power of human connection. In the Great Hall, a newly commissioned tapestry hung, a testament to their shared legacy. It depicted a lord and a master embroiderer, their hands joined over a loom, a symbol of shared creation and enduring love, a vibrant testament to a partnership born from a whisper of destiny. The scent of beeswax still mingled with roses in Ashworth Hall, but now beneath it was the faint, enduring whisper of countless threads, woven not just into fabric, but into the very heart of the house, a story of dignity claimed and love found, enduring through the ages.